Well, it can't really go up from there, can it? James Bond, I like that. So, quick question. How many of you know somebody who needs GTD way more than you do? Okay, keep your hands in the air if you work with them. Okay, and put your hands down very quickly if you have colleagues in the room. Okay, so if you kept your hand in the air for both questions, this session is for you, because what we're going to do is kind of go beyond the individual and individual skilling up to look at what happens on a team, in a department, on an organization, when people get this and start to use it as a standard way of working between each other, okay? As Ben said, I'm Ed Lamont. I started Next Action Associates with my partner, Todd Brown, 10 years ago in the UK and Ireland, and about 6 years ago, we started Next Action Partners in Germany with Detlef and Sabri, who you'll see here later. And over the 10 years, we've had the opportunity to work with some very large organizations for sometimes 9 or 10 years, and we've worked with hundreds, sometimes thousands of people in those organizations. And we noticed at a certain point that there were some interesting impacts. And we went to the organizations and said, hey, look, you're spending a lot of money with us. Would you like to find out what's happening? They said, yes. And we were a bit nervous, but we ran some surveys, and the reports came back. And they said some wonderful things about individual productivity, individual stress reduction, but also some very cool things about the cultural impacts. Now, that was wonderful, but also kind of worrying because we hadn't set out to do that. And I was kind of like, wow, that's a missed possibility. We did this accidentally. What might happen if we tried to do something with that? And that's why we're having this panel here, is to kind of explore what is the cultural impact of GTD. And it's a complex and slightly nuanced subject. We've decided to do a panel in order to do that. So let me bring the panel out here. We've got Deb Smith-Hemphill, Mary Jane Roy, and Spencer Hanlon to come on up and give us their experience of working with GTD in a culture.
Brand new knees, so I'm going to stand up, if that's okay for everybody.
So without putting too fine a point on it, who are you and why are you on a panel on GTD and a healthy high-performance culture?
I am Deb Smith-Hemphill, and there are two possibilities here. One of them being we bought a new firm at the end of last year, so to quote Ben, wherever he went, we went from 36 due to 84 due overnight. And their culture was not a GTD culture, and our culture was. So we needed to assimilate them into our group. That's one reason. And the other is I could just be the luckiest kid on the planet to be here at the summit and standing next to James Bond. What a dream. Can't stand it. So
I can see that one's going to run and run.
Yeah.
Mary Jane?
Yeah, Mary Jane Roy, and I'm really pleased to be here. This is a topic that is a real focus for me, a real close to my heart. Let me put it that way, thriving workplaces. So I'm thrilled to be here and to be with Spence and Deb and Ed to share ideas, thoughts about thriving workplaces.
Spencer, good morning, everybody. I'm a corporate practitioner, if you like. I've been working with Ed and Next Action now for about 10 years. I stumbled across GTD coming out of Dulles in 2009, devoured the book on the way across the Atlantic, did the course, did the coaching, listened to the audiobook, and my first thought was, I'm not telling anyone about this. This is incredible. This is a competitive advantage. That didn't work for very long, and I recognized very quickly that to really get the value from it at work with my colleagues, I needed to turn 180, and I'm happy to share that journey with you today.
Cool. So let's get stuck into, like, what are the hallmarks of a thriving culture? GTD independent, what does a thriving culture look like?
Right. Thanks, Ed. Yeah, and I think before I touch on some of the qualities of a thriving workplace, I think what's really important is to share that a highly distressed workplace is the antithesis of a thriving workplace. I think we can all accept that. Stress is the #1 health concern here in the Netherlands. I don't know about anywhere else, but it wouldn't surprise me to hear that it also is. And stress is really destructive to what we want to see in a thriving workplace. So you heard yesterday from a couple of the speakers, the precognitive or the prefrontal cortex shuts down to some degree or another when we're under stress. If it's a minor irritation, it's not much, but if it's road rage, for example, if anyone's ever experienced it, then it's almost a total shutdown. So we really need to find ways to create a thriving workplace where people can develop and implement resiliency skills to help, and emotional agility in order to help create a less stressed workplace. We all know how to keep the pedal to the metal. Dave Covey mentioned that yesterday. We need time to recharge. We heard that from Daniel Pink as well. We have to take those breaks during the day regularly. That's the antithesis. And the thriving workplace, I broke it up kind of in my mind into two. From the employee standpoint, you've got motivated, engaged, creative, productive employees who feel and know that they're appreciated for the work that they're doing. They feel safe because they know that their leaders trust them to make the right decisions. So they take risks. They're willing to take some risks. They have autonomy in making the right choices for themselves so that things such as taking a break are possible during the day without being judged by it. There's a whole scale or a scala of ways that we can create a thriving workplace. Crucial, and I want to just mention, we talk about happiness at work, and a lot of people find that a misnomer. But it's not about, and I think even Emily just mentioned it, it's not about the hedonistic happiness at work. It's about, and Deb, you and I spoke about it last night, it's about the purpose, the meaning that we get from the work that we're doing. So from a leadership point of view, it's crucial that for the leaders in this room, management level, that you absolutely, full-heartedly support employees to create this thriving workplace. Ultimately, we can focus on shareholder experience, we can focus on the client experience, but if you put first things first with the end in mind, thank you, Stephen Covey, you have, with the employee experience, you're going to reach those goals. They will happen. So basically, that's the hallmarks.
Thank you. Anything you guys want to add briefly to?
No.
Okay, well, then let's go straight to how does GTD support that kind of culture?
Well, I can only speak from our experience of assimilating this new group, but GTD has given us a number of tools, common vocabulary, common behaviors that support the value system that we engage in our organization, and then the tools that are captured around focus and clarity. So when we look at common vocabulary, one of the first things we discovered early on is their idea of outcome and our idea of outcome were two really different things. And they looked at outcome as a task list, and we looked at outcome as what does done look like, and what will you hold in your hands when you're done, or what will be true at the end. You all know the magic questions. So it's incredibly difficult to build trust, for people to feel safe if we're using two different vocabularies. So having that tool of common vocabulary was incredibly useful. And then common behaviors that supported our value system. So I would call on weekly review as one of those behaviors, to be current and to be clear about your commitments to other people and other people's commitments to you. Because part of our value system is we meet our commitments to our clients, to each other, and if you're not current and clear, you can't possibly do that. The thing with cultures is they really define how we treat each other, in my mind. And when we looked at culture and we looked at assimilating these people in, one of the things that we realized is they're all great folks. You can't say to somebody, or it's very difficult to say to somebody, you need to be this way in our culture, because it's not really actionable. People interpret that very differently. So if you said to me, Deb, you have to be honest, I would say, I'm honest. And then you say to my wonderful husband, David, you got to be honest. David's going to go, I'm honest. If the two of us are walking down the street and there's 20 euro laying in the street, my husband will pick it up and he will turn it in to wherever establishment we happen to be in front of and say someone dropped it. I'm picking it up, celebrating, and looking for a place we could go get a drink with it. It's like a whole different behavior. And so we wanted those common behaviors, like a weekly review. This is what we do in our culture to support these values. These are the daily choices we make, as opposed to be this way to be part of our culture. That's not actionable. And then the last part were really the tools that we got with focus and clarity, because when we took over this new group, we also took over all their commitments, which we had to get focused on laser quickly and laser precisely. And so we used the tools of the natural planning model to ask the right questions so that we could get clear very quickly as to what it was they had made commitments to these clients about, which were now going to be our clients and our commitments as a team. Clarity was an interesting point for us because we realized that in their former culture, no was never the right answer, and in our culture, sometimes no is the right answer. If I made a request of somebody and in their brain they're thinking, that's the dumbest thing you could ever suggest, Deb, and what are you thinking? But if their face is saying, you bet, sure, they're feeling like they have to say yes to me, which violates trust and truth, wherever Emily went, and it doesn't take us where we need to go. So we had to encourage people to say no, we had to ask them for the no's, we had to thank them for no's, we had to teach them how to say no. Because if they see risks and options that I don't see, we're looking at two different maps of the same piece of work, and we need to look at the same map, or we don't have clarity. So all those tools have been really helpful to us in bringing this group of wonderful folks into our team.
Great. I love the no example, because very often in the seminars that we're running, people will say, well, you know, I need to say no more, or it becomes clear to them that they need to say no more. And we don't teach them how to say no. They might learn that someplace else, but what GTD does is give them a backbone for getting clear on just how much they already have on, right? So they can say no. They have a little bit more support for that.
And with that weekly review, with some of the other practices, they're very clear about where are the risks and what are the other options, which Mary Jane and I had a conversation by email. Those options are the yes behind the no. Here's the other way we could help you, or here's a different way we could go. But you can't see that if you're not using the GTD tools. It's just not in front of you.
Great. So,
can I just add on to that? I think that it's really an important point, because a lot of us are fearful of saying no, and this is what we were talking about. Behind every no is a yes to something else that's going to support you better. So don't be afraid of the no, as long as you're clear, which GTD brings to you, you're clear on what you're saying yes to for yourselves. All right? So just wanted to jump in with that.
great, great. So it would be useful perhaps to get some examples of how GTD has changed culture as opposed to how it might change culture. And as Spencer said, we've been working together for a long time indeed in the meantime, quite a few people have done GTD as a direct result of Spencer not wanting to share it with anybody. So over to you, Spencer, for what you saw as a leader of a company that was employing GTD.
So it's a dangerous, I think, question to answer. Describe culture, give specific examples of culture, because it's so personal. Everyone's view of what the culture, how we do things around here, I think is very different. But I think to iterate the point, I have to give you an idea of scale. So the company I worked for, I recently moved on from it, but the company I worked for ended up running for a few years. It's about 1,500 people strong. It's a credit card company. And we trained over that 10 years, half of them. Which I think is an incredible number when you look at it's not mandatory, it's word of mouth, it's reputation. But what's even more impressive was the power of this thing outside of my organization. So the organization I worked for is part of a larger group, the Lufthansa group. based in Germany and globally. And just by simple word of mouth, by reputation, this thing spread. And this year alone, Ed and his team are training around 1,300 people. So that's this auditorium plus 50%. And that's looking to double again next year. And I think that gives you an idea of just how much power there is in this methodology. But I think there's three examples, looking back and preparing for this discussion, that I would call upon. And I reiterate Deb's point. The lexicon, the fact that everybody's talking with the same language. You can replace the word chasing with waiting for. And it may seem like a tiny thing, but it's far less aggressive. I like to think of it as the sand in the cogs. Once that turns into oil, the machine works better. The second thing, and Ed alluded to it earlier on, we did a survey in 2015 of our people, and two numbers stood out for me that had been through the training. 2/3 of people were continuing to regularly empty their inbox. And to me, that was like a black swan moment. I don't know if people know black swan. Black swans didn't exist, weren't believed to exist until you found it. And I think the same thing's there with empty inboxes. It's not possible, you don't need it until you find it, and everybody else has it. And so it became common. But the other, and I think more important statistic coming out of that survey, was that 2/3 of people said it helps them turn off from work when they go home. And that means they come back to the office more engaged, more refreshed, with things out of their head, ready in a meeting to say, okay, how can I help, rather than, no, whatever the question is, I'm far too busy. And that was massive. And coming then very personally to what I think was the largest, but almost most subtle impact. When I first joined a company, there was a lot of talk of burnout. Now, that's not a phrase in Germany that's just thrown around easily. It's not, I'm feeling burnt out. It's actually a state that you are declared in by your doctor if you go there and you are overstressed. And that means you go through a process, you withdraw from the office, you're off sick for an extended period of time, and you go through a recovery period. And when I first joined a company, we were talking about that all the time. This person's close to burnout, that person's on burnout. And over the years, that started to disappear. Now, I couldn't put my finger on a number of exactly, but I can say absolutely that I think GTD and helping people to manage the day-to-day world and the outside world was instrumental in that.
Fabulous, fabulous. It was an interesting thing for us on the other side of that. When we started working with Spencer's organization, we had set aside in the seminars roughly 90 minutes for people to clear out their inboxes in the seminar. And the kind of standard issue coming in the door number was somewhere between 2 and 20,000, right? So 90 minutes was quite tight. And over time, I mean, there's a way to do it, but you don't look at every email, let's be clear. Over time, we started to have this problem, which was the number that people were walking in the door with, like a year or two later, was more like 20 to 100 was what they had in their inbox. Now, that was a problem for us because we set aside 90 minutes. It was a fabulous thing in the organization, of course. And what was interesting about that was those people knew nothing about GTD, but they were working in a culture where what was normal for us had changed, right? It was no longer completely out of control in my inbox. It was either nothing or one screen. That was normal for them. Mm-hmm. So I'm kind of interested. Go ahead.
I was just going to add on to what you said, and I wish I could remember who told it to me. It's not my original thought, but that burnout has its seeds in resentment, not so much overload. So again, when you have that clarity and you're able to negotiate, it in many ways is going to put the damper on that. And people get to draw that line a little bit more clearly between their personal life, their family time, their whatever, and then they don't resent, I have to miss dinner every Tuesday night with my family because this crazy meeting runs late all the time and George doesn't know how to run it and I'm stuck. It's a whole different mechanic. So if we don't get the resentment, then we don't seem to see as much of the...
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And another word that I'll add into that is guilt. you know? So you reduce the amount of guilt that one is feeling because they don't feel that their life is balanced. And it's almost impossible, you know, the work-life balance that we speak about, it's almost impossible to have that in our current working situation.
Yeah, today it's integration.
It's
You can't-
integration,
you can't
exactly.
balance it
Yeah,
at all.
exactly. And setting the right expectations for yourself, for your family, for your boss. So that's about how you can bring it together without having the resentment and the guilt that you're mentioning. Yeah.
For those of you who are leading organizations using GTD or have led organizations using GTD, what are the things you did as leaders to support the culture?
Living it, as Emily said, demonstrating its worth, I think, on a daily basis, showing how it does support us as an organization. We've kind of created this sandbox, which if you're familiar with sandbox theory says, there's one kid in the sandbox, nobody else wants to play, but starts to look fun, so somebody else jumps in, and before you know it, that's the more fun place to be. So we kind of created that in the culture. Also, we are that kind of culture, so we're going to ask you for next actions. We're going to ask you for outcomes. So it becomes part of not only the lexicon, but the expectations. Name of our game is No Surprises, unless it's your birthday or a very good gift-giving occasion. But other than that, we don't want to be surprising anybody. And I think people see that value, and they just jump right on very quickly. It wasn't a hard thing, thank goodness.
Great.
What I'd answer the question slightly differently. What you cannot do is mandate it. You cannot say, this is the way we're going to train you, this is the way we're all going to work, because it's not for everyone. And there are some people who are fine without it, some people who absolutely don't want to be told it. So that's absolutely the wrong way to go in terms of mandating it. But picking up on Deb, example, repetition, openness, offering of the training. I offered 4 courses a year, again, through Next Action, published them, and within 30 minutes, they're all sold out, and there's a waiting list of 20 people. I've never witnessed that before in my working life. And so you just make it available for people.
So when people are seen results in others, they're obviously going to be open-minded to trying it themselves. Yeah.
Any final thoughts before we wrap up? Anything?
Oh, there's lots. But one thing I guess I thought about is having people come to work on Monday morning as excited as they are leaving on Friday afternoon. Okay? If we can create that kind of workplace, it would be great.
Great stuff.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ed.
Well, my final thought is just, I think we can be playing a much bigger game than we currently are. So if we build on the fabulous work that we've been doing for years, like in David's case, 30, 40 years, of helping individuals to get more of the right stuff done with less stress, and we start to create a culture that people come back into when they get that learning. Because there's a part of me that's kind of concerned when we give people these fabulous self-defense tools for working in a chaotic, environment, and then we send them back, in the charge of the light brigade into this toxic culture where people aren't working like this. So I think there is a way for us to really do something much bigger, and that's why I'm very, very passionate about this idea of healthy, high-performance cultures.
Absolutely.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.